We're very pleased to have with us Jim Hall, who was the chairman of the NTSB from 1994 to 2001. He was the chair of the NTSB when the Bellingham incident occurred. He was in town. The families who lost children really appreciated the way NTSB responded to that and the way Mr. Hall addressed that. He became, to some degree, while we were kind of crying in the wilderness, as you saw him say yesterday on the video, a hero for people in Bellingham as speaking truth to power in many ways. And I just want to read a quick little snippet, if I can squint into this screen this morning, of a speech that he gave in early or late 1999, the same year that the pipeline failed, to the Association of Oil Pipelines in DC that same year. And he was addressing them about what they could do, and what he said was, "There is also the absence of a proactive regulatory environment. Let me suggest shelter. The regulatory context that is comprehensive, progressive, proactive, and trusted by those whose interests it is meant to protect. There is nowhere today the sense that the Office of Pipeline Safety is in charge, or that its regulations, its inspections, its assets, its staffing, and its spirits are adequate to the task. We at the NTSB have been asked too often by communities and courts and citizen groups to do jobs which are assigned by design to OPS, to believe that trust in the Research and Special Projects Administration and OPS is deep and wide. It is otherwise, and you, as much as the government, are responsible for that deficiency." That was 20 years ago, and that gave the people of Bellingham a lot of kind of push to continue our push to change things. And as you've heard over the last couple days, things have changed. OPS has stepped up to a good degree. There's a lot more information available, a lot of new technology and stuff going on. But I wanted to read this because this really kind of helped galvanize a lot of the issues that were going on in Bellingham. So I would like to introduce Jim Hall to the stage and hear what he has to say 20 years later.
Am I going to upset anything if I shut that?
It might turn the picture off. Can you capture that picture? Yeah, he wants to shut the computer, but he wants it on the screen.
Well, no, just to put it down.
Yeah, I think that'll turn it off.
That's fine. That's fine. Well, good morning. It's really an honor for me to have been invited to participate in this event this year. And before I begin my remarks, I have two important recognitions, and in order of importance. My wife, Annie, of 46 years, came to made this trip with me because of two things: her love for pipeline safety and her love for New Orleans. Carl, let me just bring you up to speed and hopefully give you a little faith in our government. Where the Office of Pipeline Safety failed the American people, the Department of Justice stepped in and set up the Pipeline Safety Trust, because there was not an effective voice for pipeline safety in America. And under Carl's leadership and his articulate advocacy, he has had a major impact, along with the participants in this trust, in the safety advancements in the pipeline industry. I give recognition also, of course, to the men and women that staff the companies and are the foot soldiers in pipeline safety. But Carl, you have made a difference. Thank you very much. This is a little bit of an emotional speech for me, because here we are 20 years after Bellingham. We're gathered together, and I enjoyed participating yesterday, hearing experts from different perspectives, different experiences, different responsibilities. And while all of us may not be considered experts, we have one thing in common. We all share a commitment to pipeline safety, or we wouldn't be here. The Bellingham accident happened on my watch at the NTSB. Within hours of the tragedy, on June 10th, 1999, I was on my way to Bellingham with the NTSB GO team, and only to be once again reminded why the safety of our pipeline infrastructure needed to be a national priority. Each of you can tell a story about why you're engaged in pipeline safety, a reason that brought you here today. You see my three reasons pictured on this screen. 3 beautiful lives we didn't have to lose. I had many difficult moments at the NTSB, but when I arrived in Bellingham and asked to meet with the families, I was told 2 of them were not available because they were standing vigil at the hospital with their children who had lost so much skin they could not survive, yet valiantly lived another day or 2. At that time, with 2 teenage daughters who have now provided Annie and I 5 grandchildren, I couldn't imagine what those families were enduring. I value human life. I was taught that by my parents and my church. I lived and experienced that in Vietnam. And at the NTSB, I traveled to far too many accident sites, walking around the wreckage of aircraft, of railroad cars, of tours and school buses within miles of where I lived, and what was left behind when pipelines failed and destroyed homes, neighborhoods, and families. I tried to use my time at the agency to lay out roadmaps for all the modes of transportation, which, as you know, the NTSB covers all, that would lead to improved technology or procedures to ensure that future NTSB chairmen wouldn't have to walk the same ground I did. In that spirit, I gave a speech months after the Bellingham tragedy in which I warned the industry that continued pushback against reasonable regulation and recalcitrance in instituting improvements voluntarily would be penny wise and pound foolish. And while there have definitely been improvements in the last 2 decades, one I'm very pleased with is the federal rule requiring excess flow valves in newly constructed or renewed gas service lines. Other important NTSB recommendations still sit waiting to be implemented. Does anyone here think we have done everything we need to do since Bellingham? Well, it's only fair to say that all of us need to recognize that safety issues to the companies and to the nation are economic issues. The bottom line in the boardroom is difficult to budge, as well as the OMB officials in Washington, D.C., who stand ready to use the cost-benefit analysis to stop safety progress. In order to be safety advocates as customers, regulators, pipeline employees, investigators, or whatever your role would be, we need to follow the money. Let me share with you one example I lived last year of what happens when individuals who pay the utility bills are not represented when significant safety decisions are made. We've all heard about urban sprawl and how over time burgeoning communities allow development to creep closer and closer to the pipelines that were once in remote areas. Residents are then surprised to learn that, oh my goodness, I'm living right near a pipeline right-of-way because of local zoning many times, overzealous developers who again put profits before safety. But until last year, I had never seen a city invite the construction of a high-pressure natural gas pipeline transmission system right through the heart of their business and residential areas. I was invited to join business and civic leaders in opposing the construction of a pipeline by Virginia Natural Gas down city streets within yards of schools, churches, and community centers in Norfolk, Virginia. Not surprisingly, the pipeline wasn't being placed in leafy suburban neighborhoods of Norfolk, but through the working class heart of that city. The decision on that pipeline's location was not made in a vacuum. But who was it that made that decision? And who was invited to be in the room at the time that decision was made? The decision was made, obviously, to enhance the financial well-being of the company and to provide additional revenue for the city. It did not take into consideration the well-being and safety of the residents of the city who would be living with a high-pressure gas line right under their feet, and do so today. As safety advocates, we know it is in the interest of companies to run safe operations. And the most important factor in doing that is transparency. If safety first were the underguiding element in approving the Norfolk project, it would appear common sense would dictate against placing a high-pressure natural gas pipeline under city streets constantly subjected to heavy traffic and road work, and within the blast zone of schools, churches, community centers, and homes. I walked out of a church and counted 15 feet to where I was then standing over the high-pressure pipeline that had been put in the previous week. Well, progress? I remain baffled that a city would actually invite the installation of such a pipeline in congested rural urban areas, that a company would opt for the cheapest route while increasing the risk of catastrophe for people and property, and that's most alarmingly, state and federal regulators would permit it. You might argue, overall, the pipeline industry is very safe. We've heard 2.8 million miles of pipeline, 5 times the distance to the moon and back. But let me give you an example in another mode of transportation I became very familiar with at the NTSB. The airline industry certainly has bragging rights about their safety record, with the last catastrophic crash involving a large transport category U.S. airliner occurring 18 years ago. A lot of that, I think, was recommendations that were made in the 90s when there were so many accidents. They carry 1 billion domestic passengers each year. But what have you been reading in recent months? Both the Boeing Aircraft Corporation, once the North Star of aviation technology and safety, and its regulator, the Federal Aviation Administration, paid for by our taxes, and we contribute over $3 billion a year in taxes on our aviation, our airline tickets. Both of those organizations allowed our systems of checks and oversight to evolve in such a way that the Federal Aviation Administration handed major portions of its certification process to the manufacturer, essentially allowing Boeing to certify itself, telling Congress, we are big enough and we know best how to certify these aircraft. Well, the only reason the two crashes in Ethiopia and Indonesia have not become daily fare on Capitol Hill, Wall Street, and cable TV is because those crashes happened in Ethiopia and Indonesia, not in Seattle and New Orleans. Nevertheless, the long-term effects on Boeing in both financial standing and reputation are and will continue to be devastating. In fact, Boeing's most recent estimate last July, they said the financial hit, and they haven't stopped counting, because of the two 737 crashes, will exceed $8 billion. What minuscule portion of that could have covered a little more R&D for the problematic flight management system, MCAS, or a little more allowance to the airlines for training pilots about that system? Well, the individuals who made that decision, who were paid very well, are still there. What does that say about accountability in our country? Where is the accountability in our country today? Unfortunately, our nation of late has shown a lot of loss of respect for what our parents taught us. Basic accountability. I'm not talking about our current political crisis. Lord, politicians avoiding accountability has been all too common through my professional and life and experience in politics. But now we see it in the entertainment and news industry. We see it in sports. And we see it too often among those charged with providing our basic needs and ensuring our safety. We have consulting firms in Washington making lots of money to teach people how to get through a crisis without avoiding responsibility or accountability. Well, every American depends on the products and services provided by the pipeline industry. We pay for those services, you know, through our utility bills and at the pump. And the companies reap profits. And, quite frankly, they deserve those profits. Installing and maintaining the vast structure of 2.8 million miles of pipeline, you saw some of the technology last night, it's expensive. And yes, over time, accidents are declining. But that answers the question we are all here to discuss. Is the accident rate as good as it can be? Carl's testimony before Congress earlier this year noted in just 3 years since the Pipeline Safety Act of 2016 was signed into law, there have been over 1,700 reportable incidents, and over those 1,700, 775 were considered significant. And I ask those individuals who are here representing the companies and corporations that provide this essential service, are you investing an appropriate level of your profits in research and in maintenance? Well, that's where I believe each of you, as safety advocates, should be given a place at the table. When the CEO sits down to make decisions, like constructing a high-pressure pipeline under urban streets, or deferring maintenance on a line for just one more year, or declining to invest in remote shutoff valves, someone in this room, representing everyone in this room, needs to be in that room. These are utilities given certain rights in exchange for certain responsibilities. This isn't the Mars Candy Company. These are utilities given certain rights in exchange for certain responsibilities. One of those, biggest of those responsibilities is accountability. For CEOs, accountability to their customers and the safety of their customers before their board of directors and shareholders. Probably one of the most significant things that's happened is the actions of the Business Roundtable in changing how they go about doing business and how they preach and walk their walk. I don't know whether you caught that, but that's extremely important. Because for pipeline companies in general, each day, I turn on the heat in my house and others, our safety depends on you. It is a responsibility of every CEO and board of directors to institute a strong safety culture in their companies. And that includes empowering employees to always do the right thing. Lived a long time, seen a lot of things. Most people want to do the right thing if they are empowered to do the right thing. Supporting employees who identify safety issues, concerns, and problems. Authorizing employees to stop a job when an unsafe condition is identified or suspected. And always putting safety first. Not, as someone said, as a slogan or lip service, but yeah, always putting safety first. Well, getting back to Boeing, that company is arguably experiencing the worst crisis in its history. Why? Because they forgot that rather than being accountable to the American people, they felt they were accountable only to themselves and to their financial bottom line. That happens a lot with great big companies and great big governments. Does Boeing understand that you and I don't care about billions of dollars lost on Wall Street? We do care about the lives lost in Indonesia and Ethiopia. And today, this morning in this room, we care about and remember the lives lost at Bellingham. In my opinion, Boeing was driven by profits and losses and lost sight of its safety mission. That the FAA permitted it is another shocking abdication of accountability. So I urge you, be accountable. Here's an easy test. Imagine your loved one living adjacent to your pipeline. Is it as safe as it can be? Is it safe as you want it to be? Has it been inspected recently? Do you have the newest and latest shutoff valves? Yes, I know you may have met minimum regulatory requirements and industry standards, but are minimum requirements and minimum standards good enough for your family? And I realize this is horrible to contemplate, but can you imagine if one of your loved ones was at that creek 20 years ago? Every pipeline in America should be fabricated, inspected, tested, operated, and maintained like your life depends on it, like the lives of your family, friends, and neighbors depend on it. That requires transparency among union leaders, industry leaders, and regulators, and accountability from the corporate suite to the line workers. It is in that spirit I hope we all remember Bellingham. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes, and Jim says he's willing to take a few questions. I don't know if we've got some microphones ready. Yes, we do. Any questions for Mr. Hall? I'm glad to see that some things haven't changed in 20 years, and Mr. Hall is still an advocate for safety.
Got to be a question. I see someone with a question. Here you go, Chuck.
So I'm sure you've paid attention to the changes in the regulations and the processes with, changes at OPS, now PHMSA, and I've seen them and they've been good. In your opinion, where we're at right now from a regulatory standpoint and a process standpoint, where would you say that we ought to be focusing our energy in trying to improve the regulatory framework?
Well, I was talking to some folks with companies last night. I still do not see the federal government. The sad part about the FAA is the federal government, that regulatory agency is well-funded, well-staffed, and well-organized for its mission. And as we learned, leadership means everything. Safety starts at the top of any organization. Your employees, your staff, et cetera, are going to be driven by the budgets and the financial approvals made in the boardroom, because that's where they decide what's important. They decide whether it's safety, their own income, or the shareholders' profits. The same with government. We don't invest enough in the other modes of transportation other than aviation. And the best investment probably ever made was creating this pipeline safety trust. 20 years ago, I didn't see the industry, the regulators, the community, the people that provide the technology coming together as I've seen yesterday and today. So I'm not going to go through the NTSB recommendations, et cetera, but the common sense investments for the cutoff valves, and why in the world on an excess flow valve, which was such a simple and new technology, it took forever to get it accepted and through. And it appears still as 20 years ago, there's a lot more progress being made on the liquid side than on the gas side. And I'd like to see those even out. There's a lot to be done, and that's why we're here. But I'm also proud to say 20 years later, there's been a lot of progress that's been made, and I applaud Carl. I applaud the companies that have changed their culture, involve the leadership in the business community, because that's important. They're the ones that make these decisions. So I'm pleased, but as I hope I expressed in my speech, there is so much left to be done that it's important we be about it.
It's like one more there, Glenn.
Mr. Hall, yesterday the mayor of Lawrence talked about accountability.
Right.
And you've talked about accountability. Now, he talked about penalties, and I'm wondering how you would address accountability. How would we proceed with responsibility and accountability in real terms of action?
Well, the NTSB, unfortunately, through many of its accident investigations, has addressed that issue at many levels. We've talked about at the individual level, safety management systems and situational awareness and things that help. We've talked about advancing and bringing technology into the system. Where, in my personal opinion, we've lost accountability is at the top of our systems of government and business. And the only way to change that is for the individuals who are at the bottom of the system to demand accountability at the top. And sometimes that's not so easy. Sometimes that might mean standing in the street with a sign. Sometimes that might mean writing a letter. But the greatest three words in the English language were said by Winston Churchill: never give up.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll give Bruce the last question or statement. I don't know which is coming.
Yeah, I don't have a question. Is this on?
Yep.
The picture of the boy holding the fish, that was my stepson, Liam. And I've been on the board of the Pipeline Safety Trust since its beginning. And I've stayed on and stayed involved all these years because I want to keep trying to make a difference. But I don't have, and so I feel like I've made a difference. I certainly am proud to be a part of the Pipeline Safety Trust because I know it's making a difference. But I've always wanted to have a stronger voice, and my voice, I feel like, is mostly overcome by my emotion. So I'm involved in other ways. And so I just wanted to say I've been dependent on the voices of other people, and I'm thankful to the Pipeline Safety Trust, but I'm especially thankful to Carl and to you, Jim, for your continued advocacy for pipeline safety. And so from the bottom of my heart, from Marlene, Liam's mom, and from Liam, I want to say a very sincere thank you.
All right. We're off to another good start this morning.